Hello everybody, my name is Professor Rich, and today we are looking at affixation, which is creating words in English from the smaller parts of those words. As you can see, Ginger's here to say hello, but he's getting a little bit camera shy. Say hello, Gingy. Say hello, Gingy. Okay, that's his way of saying hello. So hello to everybody today, and there's a little vote in the chat where I said, what's your favourite way to study? And the reason for saying that is we will use the context of education and study for our learning today. And interestingly enough, we have the majority of people preferring to study with a teacher. That's 60%. 40% study alone. And no one likes to study with friends or with ChatGPT. So there you go. All right, everybody, affixation. So the word itself looks quite complex, doesn't it? We have affix and ation. And in the word affixation, we have some affixes themselves. Affix means like attach or connect. So when we talk about an affix, it's like a connection or even a piece. And so affixation is like the noun incorporating pieces. In fact, the pieces which build up words. So if we look at the affixes of affixation itself, we've got affix, which is the root of this word, and ation, which is a type of affix called a suffix. And suffix means it goes on the end of the word. All right, so let's move on. Let's see what we're actually doing today. I'm going to start with the word educate. As I said, today's context will be about study and education. So we have here the word educate. And let's get rid of that. Move that over there. Okay. So I want you to think about using this root, the root of educate. What other words can we make using that root? You can type those in the chat now if you can think of any words you can make using educate as the root. And hello to Julia, hello to Manuel, hello to Pure Care, hello to Ulkuz Hajikyev. Hello for the first time. Haven't seen you before here, buddy. Hello and welcome. Hello to Ekaterina. And hello to Pachu, who's being quiet at the moment. So what other words can we make using educate as a root? So in other words, what prefixes and suffixes can we affix, or can we connect, or can we add on to the word educate to make another word? So we got some here. Non-educate. I've not heard of non-educate actually, Julia. Non-educate. Maybe non-educational. Non-educate. Yeah, I'm not sure about non-educate. Educator. That's a good one. So we've attached the affix OR, the suffix OR, educator. OR often used to mean the doer, which is normally the person, although not always, but most of the time that's a person. So educator, we have the person who educates. Right, let's have a look at one of my examples. So I've put re-educate, and here we have the prefix re. Prefix is a type of affix which goes before the word. So we have the word educate, and before that word we have re for re-educate. Now, what is the meaning of this rather nefarious verb? What is the meaning of this rather nefarious verb? Educate, re-educate. You require re-education. What do we mean here with re-educate? And what do you think the prefix re means? Hello to Zoya, who's just joined us. And Pachu says, again. Yeah, something like that. And Zoya says to educate again. Very good. So re actually, yes, is a prefix which means do again. Re-educate, therefore, means educate again. And this rather nefarious term means that what you have learned is wrong and we are going to teach you the right way. And actually, it's often used in rather negative contexts, such as the context where a powerful government with their own perspective on the world is teaching the disorderly citizens how things really are. And we call that re-education. Education again. What you've learned is wrong, and we're going to re-teach you. So that's an example of a prefix with the word educate. How about a suffix? Let's take a look. So here we've got a suffix, and here we've got the word education. And you can see that I've added on the suffix of shun, pronunciation, shun, education. Now, if we know what the word educate means as a verb, educate, which means to teach, to instruct, to inform, we know what that means. And we take the verb educate, it means that. Now we add shun. Now, does this change the meaning? Well, not very much, actually. Not very much. It changes the form, doesn't it? This suffix, and actually with many suffixes, we have a change of form, not so much a change of meaning. We can actually contrast that with the prefix, where with the prefix you can really see a change in meaning, right? We're adding meaning to the word. The word was educate, now it's re-educate, that's educate again, that changes the meaning. However, with the suffix here, with shun, we're not changing the meaning very much. There is a little change in meaning, but mainly the change is about form. And the form is going from the verb, educate, and it has become a noun, education. Education. Which means something like all of the quality of things which relate to teaching. It's something about quality, and it's something abstract. When we say education, we might say education system, and then we have a real thing. But when we just say education, that's something quite abstract. And often you find that these nouns with shun are talking about something abstract. Abstract means it's not a physical thing you can point to. Like, where is the education? It's there, right? Like, we can't really do that. It's something metaphysical. So I've given you an example here of a prefix and a suffix, and also I talked a little bit about this, that affixes, and remember affix is just the general term for a piece which connects, so that means prefixes or suffixes can change form or meaning, or a combination of both. Or a combination of both. And Pachu's pulled me up on nefarious. Nefarious. Nefarious means evil, basically, Pachu. At a basic level, nefarious means evil. Yes, good. Katerina is asking, is this a suffix process? I would think of process as a root, but you could certainly analyze the meaning of the collection of letters, PRO, in that case. And process is not a great example of that, but we do have other examples such as proceed and precede, where proceed means after and precede means before. So we've got the difference between pro and pre. In the case of process, I don't think there's much use in breaking that down further. I think it's better that we treat process as a root itself. So I said affixes can change form or meaning. Let's look again at educate. Hello, Alia. Welcome. And hello, Asmina. Oh, by the way, everyone, now is probably a good time, if you're watching and enjoying the class, just take a moment to smash that like button, hit subscribe. And you can also join the membership now. We have a couple of members. Interestingly enough, the people who have joined don't actually come to the live streams, but they are contributing regularly to the channel. So thank you for that. And you can click that join button on YouTube and join and get all sorts of benefits, such as my thanks. And of course, you can contribute to the topics for future streams. So let's look at this. Thinking about educate, and let's think about the form, different forms. So we're thinking about ways of changing the form, that is the grammar word class. When I say form here, I merely mean the word class of the grammar. What affixes can change the word class of educate? Well, here's some. We've got educate, education, educated. All of the changes in grammar word class in English are made by... Wait, let me say that a different way. All of the changes in a singular word class, all of the changes in grammar in a singular word, yes, all of the changes in grammar class of a singular word are made by suffixes, not prefixes. So there is not a single prefix which changes the grammar class of a word in English. They're all made by suffixes. I believe that's the same in Spanish. So here you've got some examples. You've got education, educated. We could also have educates, educational, educationally, educating. These are all changes in grammar class, and they're being made by suffixes. Now, however, it is worth considering that there are suffixes which do change meaning rather than grammar class, and we'll talk about them later. However, the point here is that there are no prefixes which change the grammar class of a root word. So that's some examples of changes in form. Let's have a look at changes in meaning. And incidentally, you can see I've chosen also suffixes for this, but it's very easy to think of prefixes which do change the meaning of a root word. Here I've used the word teacher, and we've got teacher-like, teacherless, and teacherish. These are all real words, by the way. You will find these in any good dictionary. They do really exist. You can really use them. And as I've said, they are changes in meaning. They are all adjectives, indicating that we're not having different forms between these suffixes. They are all adjectives. However, it is worth noting that they do change the grammar class of the root word teacher from a noun to an adjective. Do you guys want a quick go of what these mean? Teacher-like, teacherless, and teacherish. Definitions in the chat. Let's see. People watching the video later, you can see how good they are in the chat. Can they get these right? And by the way, if you are watching later, it's a great time to smash that like button. Hit subscribe. This is the last time I'll remind you to do that. I promise. So, any ideas, folks? What do we mean by teacher-like? What is teacherless? And what is teacherish? Yeah, that's right, Katerina. So teacher-like is like a teacher. We may also say it's similar to a teacher. So when we have the suffix like, then it means similar to. Asmana says without a teacher, and this is less, teacherless. So teacherless means without a teacher. When we use the suffix less, that means without. And Katerina points out that almost a teacher with ish. So teacherish. Teacherish means almost a teacher, or we may also say it's something like kind of like a teacher. So it's similar to teacher-like, but not quite as strong as teacher-like, kind of a bit of a teacher. A bit of a teacher. Just to prove the point that we can also have a change of meaning quite easily with prefixes. In fact, if you listen to what I said before, then you will now conclude that, in fact, prefixes only change meaning. They don't change form. They only change the meaning. So we may have things like reteach, overteach, superteach, and so on and so on. We could talk a bit about what these things mean. Reteach meaning teach again. Overteach meaning teach too much. And so on and so on. So we are going to have a look at more of these in just a moment. I'm going to show you a list of 12 words. And these words we're going to consider our roots. Now, obviously, we could break them down a bit more, but for the purposes of our activity, we will consider these words to be the roots, the fixed bits. Okay? So, I'm going to show you a list of words, and I just want to know, what do they mean? And can you give an example? So we're not worried here about prefixes or suffixes. We're just focusing on what these words mean. And can you give an example? You don't have to do them in order. Just choose any one that you want. Type the letter in chat and then say, what does it mean? And give us an example. All right. So here you go. Here's your list of words. They are prove, develop, rely, view, refer, study, think, flaw, credit. And in the case of credit, it's actually credit. Well, I'll leave it to you. Let's see what you think. Credit as a verb, impose, par, and school. So answers in the chat. What do you think these words mean? Can you give an example? We might want to focus on the difficult words here, which are flaw, par, credit, which is not talking about financial credit. It's something else. See what you guys think about that. Manuel says that prove is demonstrate. View is C, maybe rather than sides, Manuel. Could be better to say C here. Katerina is saying that H, floor, is like a disadvantage. It is a disadvantage, but I would say that in terms of the definition of Katerina, it's something more like imperfection. So a flaw is something which is part of a thing and stops it being perfect. Credit helps someone. Not quite, Urquaz. That's not quite the idea that I'm going for. I think you're thinking about, yeah, actually give a credit. Yeah, give credit is something like that, but not quite. I think fault is a good synonym for flaw, actually. Par does not mean couple. Defect is flaw. That's pretty good. Prove equals verify. I think it can, but it is slightly different. Give credit where credit is due. Yes, Zoya, that's the idea. Honor someone. That's right. It's kind of along those ideas. So it's not quite honor someone, actually, but it's something like you give someone the honor they deserve for the thing they have done. So it's not necessarily to honor, which would be to like lift up highly, but it's more the idea that you're giving someone the recognition which they deserve for the thing that they have done. That's the idea of credit. No, not the financial one. And everything says hi from Bangladesh. Hello, everything. How are you doing? Develop is like progress. Very good. Rely is like trust. Something like trust. Yeah. It's kind of like you expect support. That's the idea of rely, isn't it? Rather than trust, exactly. Trust is a little bit different. Trust is a bit more like whether you think what someone says is true. But rely is a bit like you're leaning on something. Like I'm relying on my chair now. I'm relying on my chair not to collapse. Depend on. I think that's a good synonym, actually. Well done, Zoya. So Zoya says rely is depend on. And Asmana says impose is make the rules. I think it's a bit more than that, actually, Asmana. Can we give anything more than that? Something a bit extra than just making the rules. I think there's an extra bit of information that we have in the word impose, which takes it a little bit beyond just making the rules. Asmana also says that think is going through the mind. Yeah, that's right, Asmana. Well done. So impose is actually something like force the rules. So when we impose, it's like we're saying, these are the rules, and that's it. So it's a bit more than just making the rules. It's saying, these are the rules, and you have to follow them. And I don't give you a choice. So that's the idea of imposing the rules. We got some other great ideas coming up. I want to drink hot coffee with you, Rich. I have to say that sounds a little bit peculiar, everything, but okay. I do have a coffee. It is quite hot. It is making me happy, I have to admit. Yeah, coffee is good, excellent. A life-enhancing, God-given plant. Yes, excellent. One of the things of the flawed creation, which I do quite like. All right, everybody, that is fantastic. So, now that we've looked at the roots of these words and what they mean, we're going to move on, and I'm going to show you a list of those roots with prefixes and suffixes. And I want you now to focus on the prefix or the suffix and focus on the meaning of that, whether it's a change in form or whether it changes something about the meaning. I'll say that again simply. I'm going to show you a list of those words with prefixes or suffixes. And now I want you to focus on the prefix or suffix in each case and talk about what that means. So what does that prefix or suffix mean? All right, let's take a look. So here's your list, and I will just read those for you so you have the pronunciation. We have unproven, 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 development, development, disprove, disprove, reliable, reliable, review, review, reference, reference, ex-student, ex-student, thoughtful, preview, flawless, or, got that lovely British or sound, flawless, flawless, less, flawless, credibility, credibility, credibility. Quite a lot of syllables in that word. Credibility, that's 5 syllables, but listen to how I say it. It's not that difficult. Credibility. So we hit bill, credibility, credibility. Superimpose. Stress on the first syllable. Superimpose. Superimpose. Then we got 13. Subpar. Subpar. Overthink. Overthink. And finally, number 15, scholarship. Oh, scholarship. A scholarship. So they are our 15 words, and they all have a prefix or a suffix. I want you to focus on the prefix or the suffix. Type in the chat, what do you think each of those prefixes and suffixes means? Let's do number 1 together. So we have unproven. Now, unproven, interestingly enough, actually has a prefix and a suffix. So that's very exciting, and we're going to get very excited about that. We have un at the start, un, un, which means not. We talked about that before when we had, what do we have? Did we have uneducate or unteach or something? I don't know what we had. Did we have un before? Anyway, we have un here and unproven, which means not. And we got prove. We talked about the meaning of prove, provided by Manuel. Means something like demonstrate, show that it's true. So not, prove that it's true. But then we've got this un, which is a type of suffix for some irregular verbs that forms the past participle. So we've got there the suffix un, which we use to form the past participle. In this case, the whole thing is actually being used as an adjective. It is actually being used as an adjective, but it's coming out, it's an adjective which is coming out of the past participle, which is this un at the end, this suffix to form a past participle, is actually from Old German. 1,500 years ago, the Anglo-Saxon language. All right, let's see what you guys have also got here. So does anyone have development? Do we have talking about development? Lots of people saying lots of stuff. Hey, Dan's in chat. That means I'm going to get a really terrible brain crunching question at the end of the stream. So hopefully I'll have enough coffee left to answer that. I'm bracing myself already, Dan. Development. Has anyone talked about development? Development is abstract form of develop. Yeah, that sounds good to me. Orquas, well done. So we can identify the suffix ment, and ment is it an abstract form? Let's just think of some other ments. Government. Government. Is it an abstract form? I think I'm going to have to double check that, actually. Because it feels like it's more like it is actually a thing when it comes to this ment. Ment converts a verb into a noun, often denoting the result of an action. The result of an action. So we develop and then we have a development. We govern and then we have a government. The result of an action. Well, that's an interesting one. That's what my assistant says anyway. Ment is the noun denoting a result of an action. All right, moving on. We got disprove. We got the dis. Someone must have done that, right? Who's done disprove? Dis means opposite or reverse, says Theodore. And by the way, hello, Theodore. Not seen you before. Welcome, and well done. You are basically correct there. Means the opposite or reverse. Disprove. So instead of prove, we're not proving. We're doing the opposite. We're not showing that it's true. We are showing that it's false. You're absolutely right. Well done. Number 4, we've got reliable, and the suffix there is able. And who's got that? We've got a definition from Julia, but do we have the suffix? A definition also from Manuel. Neither of you looking at the suffix, though. Has anyone done the suffix able? It's a big one, this one. Yes, well done, Katerina. Yes, able means can. So able is from ability, able, and it means you can do. So when we say reliable, we mean that we can rely on this thing. Reliable. We can rely on it. This able suffix is very, very common in English. There are loads and loads and loads of words which use it, and it's super useful. So this is actually one of the suffixes which carries, I think, a lot of meaning, and we use a lot. Well worth being familiar with this able as a suffix, and you may also see it in the form of ibble. The pronunciation actually is identical, but you may see it with also in another form, and it's written as I-B-L-E rather than A-B-L-E. All right. And that is reliable. Okay, moving on to number 5. We've got review, and we got there the re. We already talked about that. Re means again. So review is actually view again. Although we do know that in society, the meaning of review has adapted to really take on its own form. Let's move on to the next one. We've got reference, and here we have the suffix of "ernts." So what do you think about this suffix "ernts"? What does that mean? Does anyone have an answer for that? That's right. State. You're right. So the suffix of "nt" does mean state or quality. So when we say a reference, we're talking about the state or quality of referring. So "nt" is often used for states or qualities. Or the state or quality of doing something. it makes a noun. All right, moving on. We got the X, prefix X, which means former. That's a Katerina again. She's doing all of these. Julia got it as well. Well done, Julia. Julia got it twice. Right, moving on. Thoughtful. And this time we got the suffix full. So what do we mean by the suffix full? Did anyone get an idea of full? The simple way of defining full is that it is actually full of. Full of. So when we have this suffix full, it's kind of like the opposite of less. And we can see number 10 there with less, flawless. That means without flaw. So flawless actually means perfect. And the opposite of less as a suffix is full. So actually we can have the word thoughtful, which means with a lot of thought. And then we have also thoughtless, which means without any thought. So thoughtful and thoughtless. Thoughtless. Moving on, we got preview. This time we have the prefix of pre, the prefix of pre. Pure cur, you're right. Pre means prior. It means before. Means before. And this is often contrasted with the prefix of pro, which means after. I've never heard of pro view, but we do have other examples where we have a pre and a pro. Precede and proceed. Proceed means after, precede means before. Moving on, we've got credibility. So credibility is actually very related to this suffix of able, only now we've got ability. Rather than able, we have ability. And this really is the noun form of the adjective able. So if able is for adjectives, it means you can do it. Then ability is for nouns, and it means the quality of being able to do it. So if we say that something is credible, it means that we can give it credit. And if we talk about credibility, it is the quality of being able to give something credit. In other words, the more credibility you have, the more that we can look at you as an example of someone who should be credited, which means you have, in fact, done something to deserve that credit. Next one we got is super. Super means above or beyond. And impose. Now, we talked about impose. It means like you force something onto something else. But when we superimpose, we're talking about above and beyond. And it actually means that we're imposing something on something else, but also it's above and beyond it. So when we superimpose, we have layers. And this is the meaning of superimpose. We have one layer, and then we superimpose, that is, we put on top of it another layer. So we are forcing something on it, but it is above and beyond the thing itself. And that's superimpose. A super meaning above and beyond. Moving on, we got sub, as in subpar. So we talked about par means the level, and sub means below. So subpar is below level. Then we got think. We know what that means. We talked about it. And over, which means too much. Overthink means too much thinking. Oversleep, too much sleeping. Overeat, too much eating. Overdo, too much doing. And finally, scholarship, with ship being the suffix. We've had a few of these now. Ship is another example of abstract nouns. So it's another way of forming abstract nouns. And it can mean things like states, conditions, positions, collective identities, kind of groups of people, a way of sort of grouping people in a is that a correct thing? Well, actually, this one's more like a state, isn't it? A scholarship, having the state of being a scholar, a noun to describe that state. However, scholarship itself does have that specific meaning that someone is funding your studies. And words with ship are always noun forms. So, let's just zoom in on some of those prefixes and suffixes. We're going to zoom in on specifically these 3 prefixes. Just hang on 1 minute. I'm just going to shut the door. I'm a little bit cold. All right, so I'd like you guys to tell me what other words you have for these prefixes. So we've got the prefix of un, r, and dis. What other words do you know for these prefixes? Look at Julia coming in with a massive one there. So unprecedented. Precedent is the thing we normally do. Precedented means it's been done, and un means not. So then unprecedented means it hasn't been done before. It isn't the thing that we do. Very good. Unfathomable. Why are you going for such big ones? Unfathomable. Unfathomable. Fathom. So fathom means to think. Fathomable means you can think it. And unfathomable means you can't. You can't think it. It's impossible to think about. It's too much. Unfathomable. Great. Okay, thank you, Asmina. You provided me there with a good one. Undo. Undo. Now, undo is actually a little bit different because undo is not do, but it's actually reverse it, isn't it? So not only not do, but in fact, reverse the doing. Unfortunate. Fortunate being it's good, it's lucky. Unfortunate means it's bad, it's unlucky. Unhappy. Unhappy is a good one, Dan. Everyone knows what happy is. Unhappy means not happy. Unknown. Great, that's fantastic. Not known. Okay, moving on to we've got replay. Play again. Repeat. Repeat's a bit of a weird one, actually, because peat itself doesn't really mean anything. So maybe we take that one off. What else we got with redo. Redo. Do it again. Yes. Redo. Regenerate. Oh, that is fantastic. I love that one. Generate, meaning create from nothing. And regenerate, we're going to create it from nothing again. That's brilliant. Recap. Renovation. Renovation's a really interesting one because this nova is, I think, from Latin, meaning like new. So again, novation, and nova means like new. So novation is the quality of being new. And so renovation means make it the quality of being new again. Name, which means give something a name, and rename, you name it again. Okay, how about dis? Let's move on to dis. What do you think? Disobey. Remember that dis means the opposite or not, and obey means to do something someone says. Disobey means do the opposite or don't do it. Disappointed is a good one, but it's a very old word, and so the meaning of a point doesn't really make a lot of sense anymore. Disorder. It's a good one. The opposite of order. Dislike. Yes, that's a really useful one, isn't it? Dislikes. We're getting loads of options here coming up in the chat. Well done, everyone. Disqualify. Qualify means you make it to the next round. Disqualify means we're going to remove you from this round. So, in fact, it is the opposite. All right, marvelous. Okay, let's move on to the suffixes, everybody. So we've got ubel, munt, and unts. So what other words do you know for these suffixes, and what do they mean? Of course, Julia's coming in with a discombobulated. Discombobulated, which means perplexed. Enjoyable, amenable, reliable, enable. That's a bit of a tough one, because able is really the root there. Let's go for some of these others. So, yes. Amenable. Amenable means friendly. Enjoyable. You can enjoy it. Reliable. You can rely on it. Considerable. You can consider it. Actually, considerable really is, again, it's another one that's moved on in meaning. Considerable really means large now. We've got lots of words for friendly, haven't we? Amenable and amiable. Manageable. Great. Moving on to munt. Monument. Not quite sure what the root is from there. I guess it's probably Latin. Something like mountain. Something to do with stone, maybe? I don't know. Maybe you can help me there, Manuel. Management. It's good because we've got manageable and management. Statement. Statement is something that someone has stated, and state here meaning say. Enjoyment. I enjoy it. This is my enjoyment of it. Improvement. Let's improve it. And we have made an improvement. Great. Okay, moving on to unt, the last one. Offense. Violence. Reference. So we refer to something that makes a reference. Violence has taken on a different meaning, but vile from violation comes from breaking the rules. Violence is an act of breaking the rules. Of course, that is pretty much just related to physical breaking of the rules. Now, similar to offense. evidence. Prudence, preference. You prefer something, which means you have a preference for it. All right, everybody. So here is some homework for you. You can see these other prefixes and suffixes on the board. These are some of the other prefixes and suffixes which we've looked at today. So what you can do for homework is take a look at those. Just think about what other words you know for them. We might, at this stage, you might like to think, why exactly are we doing this? So I'm going to just read this on the screen. You can read it with me as well and recognize this. It says, recognition of these patterns is extremely important for language learning. Recognition of these patterns is extremely important for language learning. As we acquire language, there are a variety of aspects of language acquisition. Some of those aspects are conscious and require memorization and require conscious effort, but some of them are in fact not conscious. They are behavioral. They rely on habits. And when it comes to vocabulary, actually a large majority of vocabulary is in fact conscious and involves active memorization and explicit learning. However, there are elements of vocabulary such as these which are a little bit more rule-based. And anything which is rule-based, we can use a more habitual side of our mind. That is an unconscious part of our mind. In neuroscience, this is called the procedural memory. And we know now from studies on the brain that procedural memory plays a very large part in fluent speakers of a language, especially natives, but also advanced non-natives. And so we want to really bring that part of our mind in. And so encouraging this kind of noticing of these patterns can be very helpful. And further exposure to this vocabulary, to these kind of patterns, helps you to utilize those patterns unconsciously. That's what we want to build up because that really helps your fluency. The thing about procedural memory is it doesn't require the focus and effort of declarative memory. Declarative memory is the conscious recall of vocabulary. Of course, we do need conscious recall of vocabulary. Using language is a conscious process for the most part. Nonetheless, being able to use this kind of unconscious, effortless part of our mind is very, very helpful. All right, so smash that like button, hit subscribe. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today. We now are on to questions and answers. And if you have any questions or answers for me today, you can type those in the chat now, and I'll do my best to answer. And as for today's notes, they will be available in chat and down below the video once I've made it happen. Once everything loads up, which is not loading up. Okay, that's not working. I'm going to just post the direct link into the chat. Notes from today. And download the notes from today from that link. And if my linking service ever works, I don't know why it's not working, but it's not. Just getting an oops, something went wrong. Okay. Whatever. Right, so what questions we got today? Brace myself for the questions. I've got this feeling like we're going to get loads of questions today. Let's see what we got. See what we got, see what we got. Am I okay to print this chat? I don't think you need to get anyone's okay there, Manuel. The chat is public. You don't, I'm pretty sure that you don't actually have intellectual property rights pertaining to what you've written in chat. It's a public forum. Or actually, sorry, maybe you do actually have intellectual property rights, but it's already in public. Right. So Katerina says, Rich, we have employer, employee, mentor, mentee, trainer, trainee. Following this pattern, can we say boxer, boxee? So, you know, the thing is, you can actually follow that pattern a lot, but the word boxee, I've never heard. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that. Now, I want to say something about this. Let's just bring this down. So, So we can often observe patterns in word formations, such as this kind of and e. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single possible combination is a word that you will find in the dictionary. Like trainer and trainee. Yes, we've got that. Trainer, trainee. However, boxer, boxee doesn't. However, they can still be useful, as any competent speaker will know what you mean. Maybe the case is that boxer, with boxer and boxee, it's not really this sort of relationship. I mean, a boxer fights a boxer, right? It's the same thing. Whereas a trainer and a trainee, you have this sort of mentor-mentee relationship, right? A boxer should be more like this kind of thing. So that might be why. Nevertheless, if you said boxee, I'd still know what you mean. And just to give an example of native speakers actually doing this, by the way, Katerina, just to prove that it does actually happen like that. When I was working at the British Council in 2017, they used to talk about line manager and line managee. Managee meaning the person who is managed. Now, I had a look in a dictionary and I couldn't find that word managee. I don't actually think it's a commonly used word, even if it does exist. But they used it a lot at that centre. They talked a lot about line manager and line managee. So it is the point that I'm making here, that even if you don't necessarily find a so-called valid word which is in the dictionary, these patterns can still be very helpful in communication. And don't be afraid to use a word which you've invented. Just don't perhaps do it in an IELTS exam. But when you're communicating, you just want to communicate. It's the real world, it's communication, and these patterns are useful ways of communicating in a fluent manner, so they're good. Great, moving on. Class notes are done, Pachu, they're there. We're going to have a free talk class with random topics. I think I did that in the past, Theodore. It was actually sort of surprisingly successful, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, I remember I did do that. We had just like an open class where we could talk about anything. And it was just, I think it was in the form of kind of a Q&A. And it went on for like 2.5 hours. So I'm quite happy to do things like that. I mean, it's basically what we're doing now, isn't it? Or do you mean that you want me to invite people on to kind of chat live with some like error correction? Is that what you're talking about? How do I set YouTube to repeat? Why doesn't the YouTube player just have a very simple like repeat option? Isn't that weird? I just want my cheesy background music to keep playing. Okay, whatever. All right, moving on. Here we go. Here he is. Brace yourself, folks. Who's got the opium? It's Dan's question. My dear Holmes. Watson, we may say it does help to focus the mind. When are trauma, improvement, and instinct countable and uncountable? What is the difference? It's not normally countable. It's normally countable. I think 3 means uncountable. Right, let me have a go, Dan. Let's start with trauma. Trauma is normally uncountable. Yeah, you're right. In fact, I personally can't think of a way of using trauma as countable. So trauma is normally used in a medical context. And it's talking about damage to physical tissue. Can also be used in psychology, meaning damage to psychology, psycho somatic system. So we could use it medically. Or psychologically. And yeah, it's normally used uncountably, like some trauma. The trauma. Here we can see trauma on the X-ray. Things like that. Apparently X-ray is not one word. That's freaking me out. Now, can we use it in a countable manner? 2 traumas. 3 traumas. No. I've never heard of that. I don't know how you can make that countable. Give me an example if you want, Dan, but I think trauma is uncountable in every circumstance. All right, let's move on to the next one. He said improvement. No, you're right. That improvement definitely can be countable. Because we can talk about an improvement. Like, I've made an improvement to the house. You can do that. You can talk about an improvement. Is that normally countable? I think it normally is countable, yeah. There are 3 improvements which we need to make to our studying habits. You said it's not normally countable. Yeah, I believe that. I believe that's right, Dan. I think it's not normally countable. I'm gonna make my face bigger because, you know, YouTube likes that. Hello, everybody. It's not normally countable. Is it ever? No, you said it's not normally countable for number 2. What's the difference? 2, it's not normally countable. No, I think it is normally countable. When is improvement uncountable? He's gone through some improvement. You definitely can use it uncountable. I mean, we could compare, you've made some improvement, which implies it's uncountable, versus you've made some improvements, which appears to be countable. So we might say that improvement, uncountable, is the kind of general state or a thing which, a collection of things, a nebulous collection of things which have resulted from the action of improving, whereas improvement in a countable sense is a single identifiable result of the action of improving. Something like that. Improvement is a fine thing. Seems pretty good to me. It is a fine thing, isn't it? I really like this improvement. This is a countable example, but not that one. Very flexible. So I hope that helps, Dan. And we're moving on to Dan's last one now, which was instinct. Instinct. I have to play Act on Instinct remix by Signify. Hopefully they don't copyright me just for that. Don't copyright me, please, Signify. Okay, I appreciate your remix. That's why I'm going to play it. One of my students asked about Instinct, so let's go.
We are going to have to act if we want to live in a different world.
It's a little bit too loud for me. Right. Instinct. You have good instincts, so that's obviously countable. I mean, whenever we can pluralize something, it must be countable. So you have good instincts. And we can certainly talk about individual instincts, can't we? We have an instinct to breathe. So that's for sure, isn't it? Now, how about uncountable? I don't think this would normally be uncountable. You might see it in an expression, such as act on instinct. It sort of appears to be uncountable there as part of the expression. That's a verb. But would we say something like instinct is required, or instinct was required for survival? Instinct was required for survival. What about some instinct? Yeah, I think that the uncountable use here would be the unusual one. So I'm going to say instinct is normally uncountable. Improvement is normally countable. And trauma is uncountable. All right. Any follow-ups, Dan? You can ask those and I'll get to them eventually. Thank you very much for your question, sir. And do consider joining. You can smash that join button. Thank you very much. Boxy is an unsuccessful fighter. That's an interesting idea, Katerina. But, yeah. I'm just going to leave it at that. Yeah, you know that I play guitar. I should play more, though. I love guitar, and I love playing guitar. I never have the time these days, but I do love it. So, Urquhart, what I've been doing is on Thursday or Friday, you'll be able to find a little poll on the channel, and you can vote on the next topic. Now, in the future, as we acquire more members, that's going to become a member-only poll. So if you do want to continue to contribute or to have your say in what the classes are going to be about, you're going to have to join the membership. I've got another one from Dan. Dan, I need to limit you to one question per stream. What's the difference between the two sentences? This sentence is possible to turn into passive. This sentence is possible to be turned into passive. This sentence is possible to turn into passive. This sentence is possible to be turned into passive. So what we're talking about really is this to turn into passive and to be turned into. And it doesn't even matter about passive, does it? It's just to turn into versus to be turned into. So I can turn into a frog versus I can be turned into a frog. That one is I do it. And that one is it can be done to me. So it's quite a big difference, isn't there? So if I say this sentence is possible to turn into passive, it kind of implies that there's an agent there who's part of the context, the close context we're talking about, that can turn that sentence into a passive into a passive form, passive, versus number 2, it's possible to be turned into a passive, meaning the focus there is on the ability of the sentence to be acted upon and turned into it. It's a very, very subtle distinction, Dan, in your case, in the case of the example which you gave. And I think it's much clearer in this example with I can turn into a frog, which means I have the ability to turn into a frog, versus I can be turned into a frog, meaning someone else can do that to me. Something like that. Right. Well, Manuel, you have my permission to print the chat for your own private purposes. How about that? Of course. So Theodore says, I mean, we could choose a topic from now and share our ideas and perspectives on that. We have some time to get information. I'm happy to do that, Theodore. What's the topic? We were talking about education. You want something to discuss? Okay, here's a response to Theodore's request. Discuss this. Discuss this. Let me have a think. There you go. Some teachers are damaging to student progress. Agree or disagree, and give your reasons why. All right? There you go. You think you can do that, Theodore? Have a go. Post in chat. And Dan is talking about 2 and 3 are different questions. It's not related to the first one. Did I misunderstand something, Dan? Let me go back. You can loop on YouTube. You have to right click. When did they implement that? Now I feel like a fool. Right, let's have a look. What did Dan say? It's not normally countable. It's normally not countable. What's the difference? It's not normally countable. It's normally not. Oh no, what are you doing here? When a trauma is countable. It's not normally countable. It's normally not countable. I see what you mean now, Dan. Okay. It's not normally good. It's normally not good. It's not normally good. Normally not good. They're essentially identical. We don't normally have fish. We normally don't have fish. There's a little difference in the semantics, I have to admit. Because in one, we're saying we don't. So the question of us normally having fish is not true, versus having fish is normally not true. Now, pragmatically speaking, these are identical, but in terms of the semantics of how they are presented, there is a difference. And I think if you play with this enough, you will find an example where it matters. I'm pretty sure that's true. Let me think about it. No, I'm sorry. I'm not intelligent enough to come up with something on the spot for that. But I'm pretty sure if you play with it, you will find an example where the semantics here results in an important difference. But for most purposes, that's not going to matter at all. Thank you very much, Manuel. You know, I need another like celebration thing when someone makes a donation, like it pops up and it goes, Dana, well done. Thank you very much for the coffee. Thank you, Manuel, for the coffee. Your support to the channel is long-standing and very happily received. So thank you, sir. I hope that one day we'll get to have a coffee in person on your lovely Spanish island. Did you know that Manuel owns an island in Spain? Now that's a good point. So, for those of you who are still hanging around, I should probably mention this. You can take classes with me. If you are interested, please email professorrich@gmail.com and we will set up a free 30-minute diagnostic class to determine if and how I can help you. And if we carry on, my current rate is 25 British pounds per hour, and I ask that you take a minimum of 4 classes a month. However, you can cancel your class with 24 hours notice and we reschedule. The same applies to me. I have rather a chaotic life at the moment, which does require cancellations. I'm hoping for a little bit more stability going forward. But the past month or so, there have been a lot of cancellations. I'm very sorry about that to my loyal students. Hello, Pavia. Well, you can watch it right now and participate right now, Pavia. We're having a bit of a chat. Pavia says, I agree that some teachers, due to their ineffective teaching methods, lack of emotional support, or biased attitudes, can be a damage to student progress. Theodore says, sorry, I had to make a cup of tea. Well, it's interesting, Theodore, because we just got on to talking about your question. I'm going to drink the last cold bit of my coffee now. You can cringe with me. Oh, that is disgusting. Actually, it wasn't disgusting. It was really nice. That's how much of a coffee addict I am. I love this stuff. Great. So yeah, so we're chatting about your topic. Some teachers are damaging to student progress. So we have this interesting perspective here from Pavia, who said that I agree that some teachers, due to their ineffective teaching methods or lack of emotional support or biased attitudes. So Pavia has highlighted ineffective methods, lack of emotional support, and biased attitudes. So I'm going to remove my teaching hat for just a moment. So let's pretend I'm not a teacher anymore. I'm just your friend, Rich. And I'm going to give you my opinion. This one I agree with. This one I don't agree with. And this one, I think there's something to say about it. So we're going to talk about partial agreement. That's my opinion. So ineffective methods, I think, is the definite one. There's definitely such a thing as ineffective methodology. You can measure it objectively, although it has to be said that academic metrics are often quite flawed when it comes to language teaching. For example, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even now, we have a great deal of research which comes out demonstrating the effectiveness of explicit grammar teaching. That is sort of like, I give you the rules and then you do grammar exercises. However, a lot of that research actually demonstrates the results are demonstrated using explicit grammar tests. And so, of course, if you want to get better at explicit grammar tests, it makes sense that explicit grammar teaching will help you with it. So the thing that we're measuring is designed to give like a good impression of the method being tested. And so even academic metrics are not particularly useful in this sense. I think we could talk forever about the kind of bias that goes into so-called scientific study. And we can get into a whole discussion there about what science is exactly. Because science, of course, science needs effective measures. And we can often criticize those measures. But, from my perspective, there is such a thing as an ineffective method. I think the one thing that I would tie my post to, the one post that I would tie myself to more than anything is motivation. I think that motivation is just totally critical to effective learning. It's so difficult to learn something if you don't have any motivation to do so. And so if motivation, if being interesting is not part of the methodology, if having sort of interesting content and tasks and so on is not part of the methodology, then you're very much likely to have demotivated students. Demotivated students are going to learn less because they're not going to want to study so much. So I totally agree with that. Now, lack of emotional support. It is true that for people who are under the age of 19, teachers have a legal duty of care to provide some sort of support to students. However, it is outside of the expertise of a teacher to provide certain types of emotional support. So I don't so much think it's a question about providing emotional support. It's more about, providing your students with a comfortable and safe environment for learning to take place. But, I can barely, in fact, to be perfectly honest, I can't handle the emotional difficulties very well in my own life. So the idea that I would then take on the huge task of providing emotional support to students, I think would go above and beyond really the abilities, expertise, and time commitment of a teacher. So I'm not sure that I agree with that one. But I do think that a good institution, I'll go this far, I'll say a good institution should provide some means or direction of emotional support for students. But I think that that's an institutional role rather than an individual teacher role. And then biased attitudes, yes, I agree to some extent. I think that the whole issue of bias has been a little bit overblown in teaching these days because the political climate has led to people seeing bias in terms of group characteristics. And so they'll talk about things like, all people of a certain skin color experience bias and so forth. They have this systemic bias, and so we have to combat this systemic bias by individually being, what would you call it, sort of proactively bias. What do they call it? They call it like reverse bias or something like that. Personally, I'm not a believer in that. But on an individual level, of course, I think it's important not to be biased against any of your students. And if you feel that you're making a judgment about a student based not upon their beliefs, opinions, and actions, but rather on some sort of immutable characteristic that they have, such as, being a woman, let's say, for example, then that's a problem. Like, we shouldn't be, for example, advantaging or disadvantaging students based on their gender. And in fact, in the UK, that's illegal. We have a law against that. So it's law in the UK not to do that. However, law aside, because, what is a law really? It's just something decided by the people in power. on an individual level, being a good teacher, I think, does mean questioning your biases both ways as well, because we also get this question of reverse bias, and I think that that's a problem as well. And okay, I'm not going to get into specifics on this, but there is a recent war that started about 4 years ago, and institutionally, that is, many teachers have, I think, taken up a position of reverse bias against people from the country that is perceived as the aggressor in that war. And I think that's very unfortunate, because there's a lot of those people who are from that country who live in the UK, and they have nothing to do with that war. It's not their fault. They didn't choose it. So, you know, we have this sort of general attitude towards helping the people from one country on one side of the war and kind of disadvantaging or being maybe a little bit harsh to the people on the other side. And I just don't think, personally, that's not my philosophy. I want to see people on an individual level. So I want to see, you know, how are they as a student? What's their personalities important in an English class? You know, are they cooperative? Do they follow the teacher? Do they work well with the other students? You know, these things are important to me. But I tend to be very skeptical of any personal inclination which comes about as a result simply of the political nature of a country that someone's come from. So that's where I'd agree with that. Of course. Of course. Theodore says, reduce coffee for your health, Professor. We need you. Reduce coffee for your health? Well, there's a lot of studies showing that coffee has many benefits, many neurocognitive benefits, including late onset Alzheimer's. So there's evidence suggesting that regular caffeine consumption delays the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's, Theodore. So as I made this quote before, and I'll say it again. It's a God-given, life-enhancing chemical which grows naturally on the planet. And that's my opinion on caffeine. Julia says, I beg to differ. Some teachers have a way with words and explanations, however, some students can't make heads or tails of it due to their lack of capabilities to catch up. So what Julia's bringing into the pot here on this discussion is she's talking about language learning aptitude. And there's a couple of ways of testing this. The old way was called the P-Lab, and this was from a company called Pimsleur. Something like the Pimsleur language ability test or something like that. More recently, we have the Llama. And if you Google it, you have to do this horrible test, which is painful for your mind. I found it so painful, I had to give up. But it's a language learning aptitude measure. And it is scientifically supported that if you score highly on the Llama, you could Google Llama 2.0 language aptitude test. If you score highly on the Llama, it is demonstrable that you can learn languages more effectively. So aptitude, language learning aptitude does exist. However, my perspective on language learning aptitude is that it's a useful way of determining the strengths and weaknesses of students rather than kind of using it like a limiting factor. You know what I mean? Like, we're not going to limit our students and say, hey, you don't have a high enough aptitude to learn the language, so forget about it. I'd rather just look at it and say, oh, you seem to be very good at memorizing vocabulary. So, play to your strengths. Memorize loads of vocabulary. Memorizing vocabulary explicitly contributes to your declarative lexical memory, which is a critical component of language acquisition. However, on the other hand, you might be like me, you might be absolutely horrendous at memorizing vocabulary, which I am, but I have successfully learned one other language, that's Spanish, and I think if I really put my mind to it, put effort into it, I could do another. So don't give up just because you score poorly on the vocabulary memorization aspect of this test. What you should do instead is look at other ways of acquiring language which don't necessarily rely heavily on vocabulary memorization. That's where we're going with that. Echo says, I agree that some teachers can be damaging to student progress. A teacher who is not fully prepared or knowledgeable about the subject they teach can create confusion or misunderstanding in students. Yes, and I relate to that, Urquhart. You know, sometimes I'm not fully prepared, I have to admit. Happens to all of us, doesn't it? Preparation's somewhat something of a weak spot for me, actually, to be perfectly honest. I'm kind of a fly by the seat of my pants style teacher, you know? I sink or swim based on the moment, and very often that pays off in a sort of interesting and creative way for the students. However, it does catch me out, but it is something to be really careful of. I totally agree. I would actually say, of course, one of the things is that I'm getting sick of this music, so just let me change it. I'm going to go back to the Command and Conquer one, I think. So something else I can put on. Let's have a look. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, go on. We'll have a bit of Command and Conquer. Right. So what I would say, Urquhart, is that we also have to be a little bit careful about teachers who are over-prepared. What I mean by this is that teachers who've kind of prepared something years ago, and then they lean heavily into that prior preparation that they did. So you do get this kind of commonality among well-prepared teachers that they're using classes and materials from 10 years ago because they put a lot of effort into it and they prepared it and it's really good 10 years ago. But you know, it just kind of feels stale now. And I'm sort of the opposite end of that. Like, I like to update a lot to the extent where my preparation actually suffers because I get bored so quickly of something that right after I've prepared it and taught it, I don't want to teach it the same way again. And I admit that that's actually a defect. It's probably not an ideal way to be. I should probably reuse my material more. But it's just not the way I like to teach. As I said before, I'm a fly by the seat of your pants teacher, sink or swim in the moment, you know. As I get older, that's probably going to bite me. I think I probably need to become a little bit more organized and stuff. And actually, I've been making efforts to do that recently, trying to organize myself. So, moving on. Mujahid. I'm interested in a master's degree in education. Do you think ELT is a good deal? ELT is a good deal. What do you mean ELT is a good deal? Do you mean as a subject? Or are you talking about an institution? ELT in general says English language teaching. I think, to be honest with you, Mujahid, I would probably look into some more generalized, like a more general area. So I wouldn't do a master's in TEFL necessarily. I would probably go for applied linguistics or education, something like that. Like, take a master's in a more general area because that'll give you more flexibility going forward. I think if it comes to TEFL, if you want a qualification in TEFL, then probably the absolute best thing you can do is a Trinity TESOL diploma or a Cambridge English Delta. But when it comes to a master's, yeah, you could go for an MSc or MA Applied Linguistics or an MSc MA Education. Could be a good idea. Give you a little bit more flexibility. The teacher's not a psychotherapist. Yeah, exactly. Off the top of my head, hardly have I ever had to think outside the box. Totally missed the context on that one, Julia. Sorry. Teachers who set low expectations for students or fail to recognize individual needs may cause students to feel unmotivated or incapable of succeeding. This can bring about a lack of confidence. Yeah, that's true. It's a tough call, though, Orquaz, because if you've got, like, just 18 students, like, it's difficult to really cater for the individual needs of 18 students. It's difficult enough to cater for the individual needs of one student. But that is the benefit of one-to-one classes. And by the way, if you want to take one-to-one classes, you can take classes with me if you're interested. Just email me at professorrich@gmail.com. That's professor spelt the Spanish way, meaning teacher. And we will set up a free 30-minute diagnostic class to determine if and how I can help you. The idea of a good teacher may change from country to country. I would say that. Let me load that up again. I would say that a good teacher means to help students questioning the topics and the world in the right way. Oh. Critical thinking. Yeah, I agree. You know, one of the ironic problems with teaching critical thinking is that it's often taught with the idea of bias planted in it. And so the person teaching critical thinking often kind of puts bias onto the way that they teach it. I mean, look at this. If I teach critical thinking, I go, okay, we're going to do some critical thinking. Here are 10 tweets from President Donald Trump. Now let's practice critical thinking. I mean, there's already some bias built into that because I'm making Trump the target, right? Whereas really what you should do is say, okay, here's 5 tweets from Donald Trump and here's 5 headlines from the Guardian newspaper. Let's look at these with critical thinking. And now we have a bit more of a balanced perspective because we're sort of breaking down both of them. We're being critical of both of them. So, you know, when practicing or teaching critical thinking, we have to be careful about the object. We want to use a well-rounded object. As of course, when you teach critical thinking, one of the things you should be teaching is you should be teaching the students to be critical thinking of you, about you. In other words, don't just accept what I'm telling you, but instead have a little think about it. I invite students to disagree with me. Oh, Pavia, thank you. Now you're making me blush. Katerina, do you think it's a good idea to shift from education to linguistics? I did a master's in education. I realized the English language itself is more appealing than teaching. Oh, that's interesting, Katerina. I mean, I can't really give an expert opinion on that, but I mean, I don't see a problem with it. If it's an area of interest for you, then why not? You see, what you might be able to do is you might be able to find a university which will give you recognition of prior learning. This means basically using the credits from one of your masters in order to supplement another master's. And so it's possible you could use credits from your education masters in order to supplement a linguistics master's. I don't know, it's just a possibility, something to think about. Thank you very much, Julia. Julia says, Rich possesses a vast knowledge in teaching in many ways while supporting the students in a big way. Well, I try, but you know, I fail a lot. He's the GOAT at all times. Definitely not true, but thank you for the thoughts. Very nice. Katerina says, I wanted to continue studying linguistics, but my study background is in international relations and a master's in education. I mean, I don't see why you can't transition to linguistics, but it depends on the institution. What you need to do, Katerina, is contact the course leaders at a number of institutions and ask them their thoughts. And also, if you can get your university transcript, you can give them a copy of it and ask them to consider if it's a possibility that you can have recognition of prior learning. That's something you can do. That's it, folks. That's it. So I guess that brings us to the end. Thank you very much for joining me today. Oh, what's this? Descartes says Descartes questions his existence as a priority. Cogito ergo sum. Dubito ergo. Cogito ergo sum. Which means, I doubt, therefore, I think, therefore, I am. The fundamental question of auto-epistemology, in other words, questioning our own existence. Pavia says, Julia, I have to say from my personal experience, he's the best language teacher I've ever come across so far. Thank you very much, Pavia. That's a lovely comment. Do appreciate that. Urquhart says, can you give me some advice about IELTS? Advice about IELTS? Yeah, sure. Of course I can. I have many students who take IELTS. It's one of the popular areas of people taking classes with me is to take IELTS. So, number one, practice the exam. Number two, keep a record of your results. Oh, by the way, when I say practice the exam, I mean under examination conditions with a strict time limit. That's important as much as possible. Keep a record of your results. You need to know what you're scoring in order to predict what you're going to score in the future. That's important. So it's quite easy. You can go into Google Sheets and you can set yourself up a little progress tracker. I did this for one of my students recently. And so you have something like this. Have a little assessment tracker that you set up in Google Sheets where you're keeping track of the raw scores and the bands that you're getting in order to help you see your progress. So that's really important. I mean, that's really the main thing. You just, practice the exam. Like it's the best thing you can possibly do to improve your IELTS score is to do IELTS. And get a good teacher. Smash that like button, as Julia says. All right, everybody, it brings us to the end of our stream. God bless. And if you should be so inclined, walk in our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and my personal Savior at the very least. Some of you may not have that particular belief, but I would encourage you to investigate as a Christian. I'm called to by the Word of God. Have a lovely and blessed weekend, everybody. Rest and relax. That's what weekends are about. Rejuvenate yourself for the week ahead, as I intend to do with the rest of my afternoon. It's been my pleasure. And I do hope I will see you again next Saturday. Make sure you smash that like button if you haven't already. And I'll catch you later. My name's been Professor Rich. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.